It is truly an honor and a privilege to host Rabbi Stephen Weil for tonight's lecture. He received his rabbinic ordination from Rabbeinu Yitzchak Theological Seminary, a master's degree in business administration from NYU's Stern School of Business. He began his career as a teacher, and then he began his pulpit work at the Young Israel of Oak Park, Michigan, and then as the rabbi of Beth Jacob Congregation in Beverly Hills, California. In 2009, Rabbi Weil became the Chief Executive Officer of the Orthodox Union, and today he continues to serve the OU as their Senior Managing Director. Rabbi Weil is not only a sought-after teacher and lecturer. Rabbi Weil is a Klal Yid. Every community is his community. He works tirelessly to further the efforts of the OU to enhance Jewish life for every Jew and every community. It's thanks to his direction that the OU is able to continue to strengthen and enrich countless communities, including our own. I would also like to give a special thanks to Rabbi Phil Karish of Chicago, a mispal and dear friend of our very own Rabbi Kobe Robinson. Rabbi Phil Karish is the Midwest Regional Director for Synagogue Consulting for the OU, and it was through his hard work that Rabbi Weil's visit to Cincinnati was able to be possible. The month of Elul has already begun, and we're approaching Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and as the Yom Noraim approach, something that's on our minds are relationships that we have that we'd like to improve. Someone that we may have hurt that we want to ask mechila from, forgiveness from, but all too often, the relationship that goes overlooked is the one that's the most important. Our relationship with our very own spouses. And therefore, it's very appropriate to hear from Rabbi Weil tonight about the state of marriage in the Orthodox community. With no further ado, I present to you Rabbi Stephen Weil.
I want to thank Rabbi Alt. Our family, we're in the cattle business. We buy and sell livestock and have dairy farms about 50 miles from Buffalo. Rabbi Alt's parents were the staples of our community. His Balei Chesed, but more than his Balei Chesed, whenever someone had a simcha or someone had a sorrow, it was ultimately Rabbi Alt's family, through the catering and through the support, that shaped and defined that simcha, or God forbid, that tragedy. And Rabbi Alt is having a huge impact here in Cincinnati, before that in Houston. But I can tell you that his family and his nurturing and development in the city of Buffalo left a major impact on all of us. And it's an honor to be associated with Rabbi Alt and to be associated with your family. B'shus Rabbi Balk, the Rosh Kol, B'shus Rabbi Spetner, and B'shus the Rabbanim. We did a study on our community. What we did was two sections. First, we did a study on 1,700 Orthodox Jews. Then we tweaked it. We brought it to a firm in Phoenix to see were we asking the right questions, were we doing it in a proper scientific way. And based upon that tweak, we did a study on another 3,500 Orthodox Jews. Hasidish, Yeshivish, Modernish, Balei Tshuva from birth, Sephardim, Ashkenazim, Persians, Syrians, you name it, Yemenites. We had those who were divorced, those who were married. People acknowledged, was it a first marriage, a second marriage? And we had an opportunity to do a serious study, and it was actually presented as an academic paper to the Eastern Association of Psychologists. And what I want to share with you is, to a certain degree, the findings that we came up with. Now, before we start, I'd like to share the good news. The good news is the following: that of the 5,200 that were studied and surveyed, 74% of men and 72% of women said they rated their marriage as either excellent or very good. Why is that significant? Because when the exact same question is asked to Americans of all stripes and colors, the numbers are 62% of men and 59.5% of women rate their marriage as either excellent or very good. So statistically, we're at the far end of the bell curve. And as well, 80% of those who were surveyed said if they could do it all over again, they would marry the very same person. Which again, look, I wish I could tell you it was 99%, but 80% is off the charts. That's the good news of what we discovered. But I'm not here in Cincinnati to share the good news. We're Jews, right? We don't want to hear good news. We love to obsess on sorrows. I mean, I don't know if you heard, with all that's been happening in the world, with the problems we have with Iran and the Syrian border, with the rockets from Gaza, from Hamas. Did you hear what happened in Israel this week? Did you hear? They discovered in Israel a dinosaur this week in Israel. And you know what the Israelis named it? A Brontosaurus. Why? Because we're Jews. We love to obsess on the tsaurus. And that's why I'm here. Not to talk about the good news, but what were the challenges? What did we find that are really challenges in our community and that we can learn from? There were 6 factors in our community that 15% or more of those surveyed said is a challenge in their marriage. It's a significant challenge in their marriage. So we're going to analyze this evening those 6 factors. The first, and I'm going from least to most significant. Number 6 is religious differences between the couple. And particularly those who checked Balei Tshuva, it was much more, it was a much higher percentage. Because you can imagine, someone becomes observant, you know, when they got married, there was no taras mishpacha and mikvah. There was no limitation on where we can eat, where we can't eat. What do you mean on Shabbos I'm trapped in my own home? This is a very significant issue because some people are going a mile a minute in terms of their religious growth, but the other spouse is not. They didn't sign up for this. Amongst those who put FFB from birth, here's an issue. You and I, let's assume that we get married in our 20s. Or our 30s, or our 40s, or our 50s, whatever it is that we get married. Who I am in my 50s is not who I was in my 20s. Who I am in my 60s is not who I was in my 30s. We are all growing, we're all evolving as people. What happens if the couple doesn't grow together, but they grow in different directions? And I'll tell you where this specifically was very significant. Wherever there were adolescent children involved, meaning, if they're not on the same page in terms of where they'll go on vacation, where they will eat, what they will eat, what does Shabbos look like, they can work it out. The problem is when you have adolescent children, they're going to take that daylight or that gap between a husband and a wife, and they're going to draw a wedge in there and split it wide open. What do you mean? Mom lets me do this? Or what do you mean? Dad lets me do this? Okay with father. And it causes tremendous tension. So religious difference was number 6. Number 5 were issues associated with intimacy, with the bedroom. And that was very significant. In America today, in almost every community, we do a pretty good job of teaching achas and akala, taras hamishpacha. We have mentors. Females mentor the kalas. Rabbis or males mentor the groups. And we do a very decent job teaching that. Where we're not as strong and where we have challenges is preparing the very same bride and groom in the area of v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. The emotional, the psychological challenges that come with marriage. Where we're not doing the same job as dealing with the issues of ona, of intimacy, and the challenges associated with that. You know, we've done studies on adolescence. And this is true in the Hasidish, it's true in the Yeshivish community, it's true in the Modernish community. Ein bayis asher ein sham meis. Today, young men, whether they are allowed to have a phone or not allowed to have a phone, the percentage of our sons and our grandchildren that spend significant time watching pornography on their phones is very significant. Way over 80% in all communities. Doesn't mean that everyone's addicted to it. But the problem is then they get married. And marriage is not what the images that they're used to seeing on their phones. Something else. We teach all of the young men and all of the young women in preparation for marriage the famous Gemara in Nida, Daf Lamed Aleph. Everyone knows the story of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is not saying this is why the Ribono Shel Olam, why God Almighty gave us Taras Mishpacha, because we don't know why God gave us anything unless He tells us, and He didn't tell us. But Tamei HaMitzvos, not from the Tam doesn't mean why, it means what, like the taste. How do I relate to it? Rabbi Meir engaging in Tamei HaMitzvos says the following. The whole idea of creating a honeymoon syndrome, the whole idea of keeping a marriage dynamic, alive, exciting, it's not stale. And especially in our world, we replace our phone every 2 to 3 years, we replace vehicles every 3 years. How do you keep a marriage dynamic, engaged, fresh for 40, 50, 60 years? And that is one of the Tamei Mitzvos, one of the experiences that we relate to with Taras Mishpacha, the honeymoon syndrome. All of you have heard of Dr. Ruth Westheimer. Dr. Ruth Westheimer is a young girl in Germany, received a formal Jewish education. She's an extremely proud Jew who is affiliated as a member of an Orthodox shul in her 90s till this day. And Dr. Ruth said, 40, 50 years ago, when I, as a sex therapist, was prescribing to couples that had stale marriages forced abstinence, they thought we were crazy. Today, 30, 40, 50 years later, MFTs, mainstream marital therapists, are prescribing forced abstinence. And she said, she goes to Reform, she goes to conservative temples all the time. She says, I can't use the word Taras HaMishpacha, they don't know what I'm talking about, it's family purity. So I use the term Shalom Bayis. So we're all familiar with that. You know what we're not familiar with? There are a series of medieval Spanish Rishonim, some of the greats, the Sefer Chinuch, Pinchas HaLevi of Barcelona, the Rambam in the Sefer Mitzvos, and others that also engaged in the system of Tamei Mitzvos. And when they look at the abstinence, or the forced abstinence of Taras HaMishpacha, not like Rabbi Meir, that it's a means to an end. The purpose of the forced abstinence is to keep the relationship dynamic. But what they say is it's a complement to Rabbi Meir. That period is an end in itself. Meaning what? There's a period every month when our focus on each other is why ultimately we got married. There's no carrot at the end of the stick. We're not going to go upstairs afterwards. The total focus is developing the psychological, the emotional, the intellectual bond. Why did we choose to get married to each other? Obviously, we thought we could complement each other. We thought that we could grow together. We could build a community, be part of a community. We felt that we could raise children and grandchildren and make their lives and the Jewish people stronger. What happens over the duration of marriage? There's bills, there's details, there's duties, and we stop having the big conversations. We stop connecting and growing intellectually and psychologically. And what's the point these Sephardic Rishonim, the Spanish medieval scholars, say? There's a period every month where the whole focus is to develop the intellectual, the emotional, and the psychological relationship. Many women on the survey, and of the 5,200, about 62% of those who responded were women. They said the following: you know, when I'm good for something, oh, then he's home. He's not working late. He's not late in the Beis HaMedrash. He's not watching the West Coast basketball game or dealing with his fantasy football. Then he's home on time. When I'm not good for something, oh, he's late in the kollel, he's late at work, he's watching the West Coast game. Many women wrote, I feel like an object, not like a subject. And this is a challenge. And specifically with technology and the challenges that technology provides. It's a challenge in our community. Number 4, more than religious differences, more than intimacy issues. Number 4 were boundary issues. What do we mean boundary? Setting a healthy structure in terms of one's commitment to one's spouse vis-a-vis one's parents. We all know the story of Adam and Eve, of Adam and Chava. The Midrash Rabbah views it as a paradigm. It's a binyanan. It's a paradigm not just for Jews, but existentially for the nature of married life, for the nature of a relationship between a man and a woman. That's why there's so much rich midrashic material on Adam and Chava. What does it say? Al kein yazov ish es aviv v'davak be'ishto v'hayu lebasar echad. Therefore shall a man here doesn't mean a man, a person, leaves his mother and father and clings, davak, clings to his spouse. What's the point? The primary emotional commitment, the primary emotional responsibility is to one's spouse. Kibud aveim there is. Absolutely there's respect for parents. But one's responsibility and one's ultimate attachment is to one's spouse. If I could use an analogy, let's take the basic science of our universe. You have the sun, which is the nucleus. Orbiting or rotating around the sun are the various planets. You have Mars and Earth and Venus and Jupiter and Neptune. So use that, that's the mashal, that's the analogy. What's the nimshal? In an ideal emotional and a healthy psychological framework, the nucleus of your life, your ultimate commitment, is to your spouse and your dependent children. What orbits around that? Parents. Around that, siblings, family, cousins. Around that, the shul community. Around that, the day school, the yeshiva community. Around that, the local Jewish community, Cincinnati Jewry. The next orbit, Klal Yisrael. But you understand there's a nucleus, and then there are concentric circles. Imagine you didn't have that. Imagine you had the following. You had nuclei. Instead of one nucleus, it's nuclei. Meaning, your relationship with your spouse and dependent children, competing against the in-laws, competing against parents. And it's a real challenge for us, particularly in the Orthodox community.